This has always been a football channel first. That was my modus operandi when I first started this thing. And then the skeletons started coming out of the closet, and narratives became something I've always had to deal with. I didn't even know Tyreek Hill had a past, really. I don't pay attention to that stuff. It's important, but I don't really deal with that. But over the last couple of years, I have been at battle with narratives. But we all know now. It's all clear. We have an understanding. We were a disaster. This is a new season. We're entering the offseason, and despite what it feels like a lot of times to be a Dolphins fan, it's about fun. So I'm going to start digging deep into football stuff. And the narrative stuff, I did my thing, venting and really trying to clear up some of these fake narratives. But today I want to dig into the offseason, the Dolphins offseason. It's a critical offseason. And, for those who aren't positive about the future of the team, it really doesn't matter in a sense. Because look at how many regimes Zach Thomas and Taylor and Wake went through. Drafting players, putting players on your team is beyond the framework of the GM and the head coach. Because if they screw up enough, quote unquote, it's supposed to be that way, they get canned, new guys come in, and those plays are there. And so we've got to really just try to have some fun this offseason. I'm going to dig in hot and heavy. I put together a whole host of graphics to create an overview start of resetting our evaluation for the Dolphins. Every season I do this, no matter how, even with Eichenberg, every season I would start fresh, keeping those data points and then adding what we got here. So I'm going to talk about a ton of stuff. The problem with this offseason is we've got to add players because we've lost a lot of players. There's a lot of holes on the team. We've got to reset this entire roster because the philosophy's off. So you've got to add players, reset the philosophy, hopefully, and the roster. But then you got to make all this stuff that you're adding jive, and then jive with the players and the assets you've got now. Very, very difficult. But it's supposed to also culminate into a winning, successful season. This is a lot to ask for a guy like Chris Grier and Mike McDaniel, but it's not out of the realm of possibility that this can get done. The worst case scenario is Grier's a lifer. And it doesn't really matter if we win this season because he's going to be here the year after that and the year after that, and we're just going to keep stacking talent. That would be the worst case scenario. But ultimately, I got to believe that even a lifer would get his end date. We can't deal with that. We don't know. We're assuming that this is a critical season if we're about competition and winning. So does Grier learn? That's the huge thing. He finally came out in his way of doing things and admitted he was wrong without admitting he was wrong.
I know what I told you to do, but when I told you to do that, I was not exactly right.
So does he learn this offseason, or does he continue to struggle? And the struggles, you can find players. You can always find players that even the worst GMs find, except maybe the worst of the worst. But the key for him is those middle rounds. I'm going to show you the history here, and it's going to make a lot of sense. But as I said, the next regime, whenever that comes, some of these players might be there for them, and hopefully it's 2026. And so Grier's going to have the very heart of his failings tested, those mid-rounds, because it really looks like that Reggie McKenzie is going to go to the Titans, and that would give us 2 conditional third-round picks, 1 this year and 1 next year. And maybe Marvin Allen goes and it's 2 more. That's a lot of picks. Now, Grier had lots of picks before, let's be realistic, and he wet the bed and then pooped on it and then rolled in it and then smiled about it and said we were idiots. But let's not get into that. We're staying positive. So there is a pressure, huge pressure, to evaluate his weakest point. And that's why it's so critical to evaluate fairly. And it's why I cut things off every offseason. And it helps so much in being accurate. Because if we pin down what the problems are, and that's why I stayed focused on the physicality and the offensive line, Because if we know the real problems, the primary problems, there's other problems. We all know that. There's going to be the Tua talk and there's going to be talk about the receipt and whatever, okay? But we understood this offensive line was the key thing. And when we became locked on it, then Grier couldn't evade and was forced to admit something and maybe make a change. So evaluations are the key to everything. Honest evaluations, good evaluations. So really, for me, what I've been talking about for a while is the A and B gaps on both sides of the ball. The league changed from fun ball to now pass balance. There's a lot of ways to go to pass balance. But the key is managing those A and B gaps. I've talked about the leverage the linebackers, playing deep. You can go to my other podcast and talk about that. McDaniel said, the cover guys are sitting cover 2 and playing off. We've got to brutalize the inside. So the A and B gaps and this move to pass balance, we were highly out of balance with our run and pass attack. And if you gut out first down, it is so far out of whack. So running on that second down and third down, being successful in first down is critical, but it all revolves around the A and B gap. We cannot be ultra finesse of what we've been doing, running wide zone all day, unless we get that cutback. But that cutback is usually going to be in the A and B gaps. So it goes back to that. Red zone. A and B gaps, it is so difficult to run wide zone in the red zone because everyone's crunched in the box and it's got to be direct, instantaneously. These guys are fast. I remember when I walked on to college and I was a running back and they called me OJ because I was always trying to bounce outside when I first got there. And everyone's fast. You've got to take your holes and you got to hit it fast. And in the red zone, it's much faster. That's why it's hard to score. And you've got to hit inside. So these are the absolute keys. Now, I'm not a big college guy. I'm not going to tell you I am Mr. College. You guys, a lot of you know way more than me. I think if I start studying guys, I do pretty good. I've had a decent history of picking guys and stuff like that. Not 100% certainly. So I'm going to be looking forward to hearing what you guys say and taking your information, going through this podcast, condensing it, and continuing to whittle it down and evaluate it so we all can be clear and get a good evaluation, the best evaluation we can. For me, though, I heard a lot about Tyler Warren, the tight end. I was like, oh man, 13. But I have changed my thought a little bit. I'm not saying no, but when you look at what we've got on the table, we've got the 13th and 45 pick, and then we don't go to the conditional round, which is outside the top 100. So I'm going to give a list of the top players in that top 100 that we can be aiming at and an initial overview of what I see as the strengths and weaknesses of these guys, about 13 to 14 guys. But defensive interior, DI, Campbell's not coming back. He is not coming back, and he was huge. And what he did for us, as far as leadership and being vocal and manning that interior, was a huge, huge sigh of relief and filling of the loss of Wilkins. Wilkins was a guy that was like Campbell on to a lesser degree, and it was an important role. But now that they're both gone, this is why I think, because pass balance means on defense, you've got to be able to stop Pet. You've got to be able to control those A and B gaps on both sides. So DI is a major piece of the puzzle, and obviously O-line. There's a little finicky stuff in there because at 13, there's no guards that, Quentin Nelson that you're going to take at that point. So you're going to have to go through these tackles unless you go a different direction and then work the tackles in the second round. I do think TE's tight end is a major piece, although it's moved to my third slot. Obviously, safety, we don't have safeties. I don't think Holland's coming back. I don't know if I so much want him to come back. And then QB, we need a backup. We need legitimate competition for Tua. I'm not saying Tua can't do it. I'm not saying he can do it. But with the injury history, you clearly have got to set that thing up. And you should always be drafting quarterbacks because a good GM, because they're assets. And these are human beings, but it's pieces on the table that if you do well with your drafting the quarterbacks and have multiple good ones, you can get more capital. And that's going to be critical for us. So let me get into my first graphic. And this, you'll see it goes from 24 to 11. This is our mid-round hits over the last 13 years. And NFL rosters are built in the mid-rounds. That's what it's all about. You've got to get value. You've got to be good in this area, especially on the O-line. It's why our O-line sucks. We have hit a couple times, here and there, but overall, our mid-rounds have been terrible. So 24, we got Wright in Washington. Welker's gone, but a lot of people saying that Washington came here because he was pounding the table for Washington. But Washington's a good little player for us, and it shows you can find guys late in the rounds. We spent 2 first-round picks on Waddle, and Amon-Ra was like the 4th round, and he's doing better. It's not just because he's a better player, the framework is better and all that, but you don't have to spend, everything and its mother to get a receiver. But Wright is another guy. We didn't see much of him, but you could see the talent. But he will thrive in the A and B gap. And so the more we focus on the A and B gap, it's going to take 2 fourth-round picks that we used on Wright to accentuate what he can do. It will open everything up. So those were 2 good picks. 23 A-Chain, how can you not say that was a great pick? McDaniel, so quote-unquote, made that pick. Higgins, the tight end, we got cutesy with him and lost him to Arizona. That was a nice little pick there. But those 2 seasons, that was it. 22 to 21, 0. Brandon Jones in 20. Van Ginkel, who we didn't like for whatever reason. Won't get into that. In 19. 18 to 17, 0. 16, we got Drake, which was decent, but he never really became what we thought he could become. We spent 2 third-round picks on Carew. That kind of gets buried a lot, so that was an ugly one. McCain, maybe you want to say that. He was a free safety for us, and he played. He was a nickel guy. But you could say that. 14 and 13, 0. Well, this is not a good batting average. And so with this stack of picks in mid-rounds, historically speaking, we should be shaking in our britches. But things can change. 12, nice one with Miller and Vernon. And then Clay in 2011. But that's not a winning formula, man. That is very, very rough. And so whatever we do with this 1st and 2nd round pick, which I think at this stage, it's got to be DI and offensive line. I really like Tyler Warren. If I get back to the tape, and I think this guy is super, super special. He is. He's a really, really good tight end. But we have Jonnu, who's clearly, he broke all our records. But we need a guy who's really good in the run blocking and passing to offset with him to be that valuable. Because a lot of these top tackles, they're going quick. And when you get to the 2nd round, it starts getting dicey. But the tackle spot is a little curious too, because you've got Jackson, who I'm not fond of, but you're paying him, and he's a guy, and people are raving and saying our run game was awesome with him, and I think that is hyperbole, but we'll get into that. And then you got Paul. So those 2 guys are tackles, and if you get another tackle, is he going to take one of these guys' spots? Will he be ready right away if we're supposed to win? And then who do you put inside? If you got the 3 of them, you want all of them to start. And moving inside is not easy. I do not believe Austin Jackson can play inside. And there's a reason for it. I'm going to get into that. I'll show you some specifics. So it's a little bit dicey unless you're absolutely certain you got a guy that could play inside, because I think if you bump Jackson inside, then we're going to be stuck in finesse. You need your interior 3, who are the most important in this new era, this pass bounce era, especially for Tua because of his quick throwing and how he wants to run his offense, or McDaniel wants to run the offense. So it's those interior 3. But there's some nice guys in the 2nd round that maybe you can go if you get a DI in the 1st round and grab that guard in the 2nd round. And I'll get into that in a second. So of the top guys, the top tackles, you got Will Campbell from LSU. You can see here, my concern, though, is his gap grade. I got to watch these guys. I'm just going by the information I see. You let me know. But if you're going to keep going with what we were going with, you need a guy who's a good movement guy. And it's not terrible. He's a good player. And if we adjust more to a zone blocking with him, and you can see his grade's pretty good, but that would be a little concern if we're going to run the same old, same old. Kelvin Banks looks really, really good. He's pretty balanced. Both these guys are big. I don't really see any red flags immediately there. Josh Simmons, you can see really great true pass set grade, and that's critical. I've talked about true pass set. It's when you're asked to block alone and you're not given all this help that we give, which constricts the offense and shuts down the options of the quarterback. We were like half the true pass set blocks almost of most teams, especially the successful ones. And so a true guy who can true pass set would help Paul, who still needs marination. And you get a guy in here who could kind of mimic maybe a little bit like Tehran, where he blocks alone. Obviously not as much as Tehran. Tehran I don't think is going to be here, and that could change things too. If Tehran's coming back and they want to bring Tehran back, then it's going to point more towards this guard situation. But then what are you doing with Paul? Where's Jackson? So, but depth is nice, but at this stage, we've got to fill this baby out. So then you got Arante Esra. I don't like his gap movement, quote unquote. So that would be a little bit of a red flag. Then Wyatt Millum, who looks pretty good, but I put the red thing around because West Virginia is a smaller school, but Hunt was a smaller school, but he was drafted as a tackle and then had to move inside. So it gets a little dicey because then you got to start looking at the competition. You can look at these numbers, but they don't really have the context of who they're going against, when they did it, when they didn't do it. And that's what the film study is all about. But then you get into Kenneth Grant, DI. Listen, Sealer is a really good player, but he's getting up in the years. And I've showed that when he's inside and he gets doubles, his hip buckles, and he's tall and lengthy. And that's a way you can get him injured. He is much better as he gets out past that two technique, past the guard. And you get a big guy and zero, kind of like the Ravens. We kind of run a Ravens defense like Jones and Pierce. This could really help out Sealer along with a defensive interior that needs a lot of help with the loss of Wilkins and Campbell. Tyler Warren, I love what I'm seeing there. Maybe if we were a little backing around and we didn't have so many holes, it's a little bit of a luxury unless he was a better blocker, but I see his grade is not so hot. But again, it's just a grade. I got to see, I got to study, and I'm going to get to it. Then you got Tyreek Williams. His pass rush grade is a little bit low, but that's a guy who might, you find, because teams are going for DIs, they're going for tight ends, and they're going for offensive linemen. But that's a guy maybe you get later on. He's a big guy, great run stop grade. Mason Taylor's a guy maybe you can find later if you really are hot and heavy on the tight end. He's got a decent blocking grade. He's a little bit better than Warren. He's not as good as a pass catcher, but Johnny was such a good pass catcher. Smythe is no bueno. And Julian Hill is a big roll of the dice. You cannot bank on that going into the season. So that's another guy floating in there. I'm not too hot on not getting a top tight end. Kraft, who I liked a couple of years ago, the Packers picked him up in the fourth. There's other guys I got to get deeper into it. Or with your third round conditional. Then there's Alfred Collins, another DI. Maybe you'll find in that second round, or if people was a run on him maybe earlier. But he's a guy who can stop the run, big schools, just like Williams and just like Grant. Then you start getting into the back end where the guards are. And so there, I still think maybe you could trade back either in that first or second round, and maybe you find a guy like Tyler Booker, but his gap blocking is a little and if we're going to run a lot of stuff we like to run, then maybe that works. He seems to be a pass blocker, which is great, but we need physicality. Tate Ratledge, this guy looks like a real good player for us. Solid across the board. A guard maybe you can take and get in there. Donovan Jackson, he's a tackle later from Ohio State. I don't like the true pass set grade that he has here. We can't keep everybody in a box with two guys in routes. It's just not going to happen. And then Amaje Reed-Adams, he's a guard too, and it's a smaller school, but he has a very good gap grade, very good zone grade, and a very good run blocking grade. And that's like maybe a guy we can find. Maybe even with some of these extra picks, which I don't like, you could get the tackle, the DI, and maybe the guard or some combo. Maybe he falls a little bit later. So that's how I see the overview. I don't think we can, people are talking safety, and there's some good safeties out there. But if you don't take care of this front, you don't take care of this line of scrimmage, it's going to be extraordinarily tough the way the Bills like to run. The Patriots they're going to run. They definitely run the football. And then maybe the Jets do it too, plus all the top teams that you're going to face to get someplace. And while safety's a good pick for another regime, I don't think it's going to help us this year. We've got Ramsey, we've got Fuller, who's iffy. Kohu might not be back. You can get guys later to play that cover high. Take some of the duties off, and when you don't need a great one, it's a little bit of a luxury pick for me. So I don't really see safety as the way to go necessarily. But if you look at our roster, here's my little graphic, you could see, purple is not great. It could be, but it's guys that are going to be here. We got to count on. They're going to be a piece of the puzzle. We don't really need to look there. Red is obviously no bueno or gone. Orange is question marks. And then purple star is there's depth there. And then black is, we're almost void in that spot. And you'll see a lot of black ones. And you'll see a lot of red and a lot of orange. And you start at the top. Poyer's gone. He better be gone. There's really not much back there. There's some maybes. Holland, what we can't afford. We're broke. And I don't know if I want him back. So safety is a huge part. So the safety draft pick would make sense. But is it really going to change our fortunes? Is it going to alter the way we do things? And maybe if you hit later on with some big nose tackles in a third round or fourth round to fill that spot, there's ways to move this. But you've got to, I think with the DI, you've got to get big talent there because Sealer might be gone. He's getting older. He could get injured. You need studs inside. Walker's probably gone. Are you going to buy into the Tyndall hype? I don't think so. And there's really little depth back there. Brooks, very good pick. Again, say a lot to Alf from 2 yards per carry for picking that guy. Very good pick for us. I still think he's more of a Will than a Mike. I think we need linebackers. I got to go through the linebackers. I don't see any real studs out there. But again, I'm a little, a novice when it comes to that until I start doing my studies. Ramsey, he's getting older. He had the tweet. Do they want him to move to safety? Do they want him to take money? It was just a stupid tweet about nothing. I don't know. He was still very good, expensive a little bit for the price, but he's a guy who you could depend on, and hopefully the leadership. Kohu might be gone. Do you believe in Duck and Bonner? I don't know. Fuller, 2 concussions, and then a knee injury. He's older now too. 2 old cornerback. Cornerback could be another piece, but if this is Grier's going to be here for the next 4 or 5 years, then maybe. But if he's really got to win this season, cornerback will not change your fortunes as much as the guys in the interior. Phillips, is he coming back quickly? When is he coming back? What will he look like? A lot of injuries, a lot of time off. Sucks. I love the kid. We got the depth back there. If you look at, we got Robinson. Chop is pretty darn good. He's still got to work in the run defense. But Chop, Phillips, Chubb, how is he going to play? Is he going to be 100%? Are we going to keep him? You can free a lot of money up for moving on him. And Kamara's there. So that will be very interesting. Sealer's obviously a guy. Campbell is gone. Other than that, don't tell me about Benito Jones. I kind of like Peely a little bit, but we got rid of him. So look how, empty this defense is. And you could fill it with just guys, cheaper free agents. But our money is very tight. Moving off Tehran, Chubb. Chubb, we get the money up front. But Tehran, unless he retires, that money won't come into play until after June. Some of these big things won't come into play after June. So we're not going to have a ton for free agents unless something crazy happens. And then do you want to extend Waddle? Do you want to extend Hill? Do you want to extend Tua? That's how you get your money. And the money's really not there. Now, on offense, Waddle, he's inconsistent sort of with his health, but he's a guy clearly. Hill, I guess he's going to be back. It looks like he's going to be back. But the problem is we move to pass balance. Neither one of these guys are great blockers, and you kind of need some good blocking at that receiving position, but you got your 2 receivers. Washington, I like a ton. Still got a ways to grow. He's your nickel guy, but I put the black star because who's your boundary if Waddle and Hill goes down? You really lack a boundary receiver, and so you got to add something in there too because you've got to keep that pressing on the edges to open up the middle. But, in the slot, I got the purple because if Washington goes down and we had another receiver on the boundary, Hill can always go inside. He's actually better in the slot than on the edge. Then offensive line. Tehran, is he coming back? He did really well. But the health and the money. And so what do? We got Paul behind him. Jones is gone. It's vacated. No depth, no starter. Brewer, starter. Clearly we're going to be there. We need to really flank him with big guys to get this pass bounce, to get the interior A-B gap runs. But he's a guy. But I'm not big on Meyer, who's very weak. As our backup. Wynn's not going to be here, or maybe they'll bring him back. I don't know. But we got nobody there. Eichenberg looks like he's gone. Grier didn't seem to mention when he talked about filling up the offensive line, which I thought was very curious. But so depth and starters are really not in a good spot there. Jackson injured all the time. And he's not as good as people say, in my evaluation. So there's a lot to do there. Now, Smith, we know Smith. I don't got to go into that. But then after that, there's not another starter you could say to pair next to him. And then the depth is really weak. Tua, is he going to be healthy? Is he not? I do think the kid can play. I don't think he was set up right. I don't think he's the bee's knees and the greatest thing since in the universe. But we clearly need depth. Where do you get it? You go into free agencies, it's going to be expensive. You go get a rookie, and that's good for the future. But what about this year? And obviously the running back, Achane, Wright, Mostert, maybe if he comes back, that is good as far as your starters and as far as depth. But that is a ton of stuff to deal with. And so what Grier does is going to be huge, but he's got to fortify some stuff, and it's got to start at the line of scrimmage. And so this is why I keep going back to DI and offensive line. But Grier's streak on the O-line makes it curious. And then there's these other needs and, limited amount of money. So it's going to put back to this graphic changing in a big way because you're going to get all these mid-round picks. It'll be with McKenzie gone, that's 3 conditionals. Having lots of picks is great. But if you end up with this, you get bubkiss and life does not look pretty. So that's where we're at. That's the overview. It's a big offseason. It's a tough offseason to navigate. It can be, and we've got to keep it split into 2 evaluations, the micro of the season, the macro of the future. And so if Grier can at least get some of this right and we flop and he gets booted, at least this next regime will have something to work with. So that's where we're at, guys. I'll get into more coverage, deeper coverage of this. I'm going to start watching the film. I want to hear what you guys think because there's a lot of great information that I get through the comments, and it'll help me get a better evaluation for you and not look like a jackass by screwing up. So that's what I got for you. Enjoy the playoff games. Try to find enjoyment this offseason. As Dolphin fans, that's usually where we get most of our enjoyment. Let's hope that changes. But let's try to have some fun because that's what it's about. So Curtis saying, be well, go Fins. Curtis out. Start building your own online sports book today by getting signed up with aceperhead.com service that'll allow you to book action on sports from all around the world.